March 15, 2023. Pinewood Studios, London. Jack Morrison had spent 15 years running from one moment. The moment he chose to save his career instead of speaking the truth about faulty equipment. Now that moment was happening again. 26-year-old grip Danny Chen lay convulsing on the Indiana Jones set, the same way Marcus Chen had died in 2008. Same rigging failure. Same studio executives whispering about liability. Same choice staring Jack in the face. Harrison Ford knelt beside him, asking what to do. 300 crew members watched. The cameras had stopped rolling, but Jack knew someone was still recording. What happened in the next 10 minutes would either bury Jack's secret forever or expose the cover-up that destroyed his family. Because, as Danny's eyes rolled back, Jack saw something that made his blood freeze. The kid was wearing Marcus Chen's St. Christopher necklace. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The hook. Harrison's hands trembled as he stared at the photograph. The edges were worn, yellowed with age, but the image was unmistakable. Michael Ford, his younger brother, standing behind a camera on what looked like a jungle set. The brother who'd supposedly died in a stunt gone wrong on some low-budget Vietnam War picture that nobody ever talked about. The same brother whose funeral Harrison had attended in 1975, 3 months before Star Wars changed his life forever. Mr. Ford? The paramedic's voice cut through his shock. We need to get him to hospital. Now! Harrison pocketed the photograph and stepped back as they loaded Danny onto a stretcher. The stunt coordinator's face was gray, his breathing shallow and labored. Whatever poison coursed through his veins was working fast. Nobody leaves this soundstage, Detective Inspector Sarah Chen announced as she strode onto the set, her Metropolitan Police credentials already out. 2 uniformed officers flanked her. This is now a crime scene. Harrison watched the crew's faces as Chen spoke. 47 people. He'd worked with most of them before. Raiders, Temple of Doom, Last Crusade. They were family. The thought that one of them had just tried to murder Danny made his stomach churn. But which one? And why? I'll need to speak with everyone individually, Chen continued, starting with whoever found the victim. That would be me. Harrison stepped forward, his Indiana Jones costume suddenly feeling absurd. The leather jacket, the fedora, he was playing a hero while a real mystery unfolded around him. Chen's eyes widened slightly at recognizing him, but she maintained her professional demeanor. Mr. Ford, I understand you were first on scene? Danny was demonstrating a whip sequence when he collapsed. 1 second he was fine, the next... Harrison gestured helplessly at the chalk outline where Danny had fallen. You mentioned a needle mark? Harrison nodded. Fresh. On his neck. Someone injected him with something. Chen made notes on her pad. Did you see anyone near Mr. Reeves before he collapsed? Harrison closed his eyes, trying to replay the moments before disaster struck. They'd been running through the temple escape sequence. Danny had been explaining the whip work to the second unit director, James Whitmore. The camera crew had been setting up for the shot, the usual chaos of a film set. There were maybe a dozen people within 20 feet of him, Harrison said, but I can't pinpoint anyone specific. What about this? Chen held up an evidence bag containing the photograph. My officer found you examining this when we arrived. Harrison's jaw tightened. It was in Danny's pocket. I thought it might be relevant. And is it? That was the million-dollar question. Harrison studied the photo again through the plastic. Michael looked exactly as Harrison remembered him. 23, cocky, always ready to take the dangerous stunt nobody else wanted. He'd been fearless to a fault, until that fault got him killed. The person in the photograph is my brother, Harrison said carefully. He died 25 years ago on a film set, a stunt accident. Chen's eyebrows rose. The same brother whose death launched the safety protocols that Mr. Reeves helped implement? Harrison hadn't known Chen had done her homework that quickly, but he wasn't surprised. Michael's death had been big news in the stunt community. The safety regulations that followed had probably saved hundreds of lives over the decades. Yes, Michael Ford. He died in 1975. Then why would Mr. Reeves have a photograph of him? I have no idea. It wasn't entirely true. Harrison had ideas, terrible, impossible ideas that made no sense. Michael was dead. Harrison had seen the body, had spoken at the funeral, had carried the guilt of his brother's death for 2.5 decades, wondering if his own success had somehow cost Michael his life. But now someone had tried to kill Danny, and Danny had been carrying a photograph that suggested Michael might still be alive. Chen's radio crackled. "DeChen, we've got something." "Go ahead." Hospital called. "The victim is stable but still critical. They've identified the poison, succinylcholine, muscle relaxant used in surgery, virtually undetectable after a few hours." Harrison felt cold. Succinylcholine was a professional's choice. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing had targeted Danny. Also, the radio continued, "We found something else in the victim's trailer. A file folder labeled Firebase Delta, 1975. Contains production notes from what looks like a Vietnam War film. Firebase Delta." Harrison's blood ran cold. That was the name of the movie Michael had died making. Chen was watching him carefully. "Mr. Ford? Does that mean something to you?" Before Harrison could answer, the lights in the soundstage flickered and went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Someone screamed in the darkness. When the main lights came back on 30 seconds later, James Whitmore was on the ground, a syringe protruding from his neck. The killer wasn't done. Introduction. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Harrison found himself relegated to the role of observer as the soundstage transformed into a crime scene, complete with forensics teams, additional police officers, and the kind of controlled panic that Hollywood usually reserved for disaster movies. James Whitmore was alive, barely. The paramedics had reached him within minutes, but like Danny, he was fighting for his life in an intensive care unit. 2 men down, and Harrison couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. "Mr. Ford?" DeChen appeared at his elbow. "We'll need a full statement, but you're free to go for now. Don't leave London." Harrison nodded absently, his mind elsewhere. Around him, the crew was being released in small groups after giving their statements. He watched their faces, colleagues he'd worked with for years, people he'd trusted with his life during dangerous stunts. The easy camaraderie that usually bound film sets together had evaporated, replaced by suspicion and fear. Sarah Martinez, the script supervisor, caught his eye as she gathered her things. She'd been with him since Raiders, a steady presence who kept track of every detail, every continuity error. Her usually perfect composure was cracked now, her hands shaking slightly as she packed her notebooks. "Harry," she said quietly, using the nickname only his closest crew members dared. "What's really happening here?" He wished he had an answer. "I don't know, Sarah, but be careful, okay? Maybe stay with someone tonight." She nodded, understanding the gravity in his voice. As she walked away, Harrison realized with sharp clarity what this was really about, not just solving a mystery, but protecting the people who had become his second family. The crews he worked with weren't just colleagues, they were the closest thing he had to a real life outside the carefully constructed public persona. The drive back to his Notting Hill flat was a study in London evening traffic, red double-deckers, black cabs, and the kind of misty drizzle that made everything look like a film noir. Harrison barely noticed. His mind kept returning to that photograph, to Michael's face frozen in time, young and alive and impossibly present. Inside his flat, Harrison poured himself 3 fingers of Macallan and sat in his leather armchair, staring at the wall of photographs that chronicled his career. There was one section he usually avoided looking at, a small cluster of pictures from the early days, before Star Wars, when he was just another struggling actor picking up carpentry work to pay rent. Michael was in several of those photos. Harrison rose and approached the wall, studying his brother's face in the dim lamplight. They'd looked remarkably similar, the same angular jaw, the same slightly crooked smile that would later become Harrison's trademark. But where Harrison had learned to be cautious, calculating his risks, Michael had been pure instinct and adrenaline. "You always said you'd live fast and die young," Harrison murmured to the photograph. "You just never said you'd take 25 years to do it." The phone rang, cutting through the silence. Harrison glanced at the clock, nearly midnight. "Ford. Mr. Ford? This is Dr. Patricia Williams at St. Mary's Hospital. You're listed as next of kin for Daniel Reeves?" Harrison's grip tightened on the phone. Danny had no family. The stunt community had become his chosen relatives over the years. Yes. How is he? Stable, but he's been asking for you. He's saying some things that don't make much sense. About your brother? He seems quite agitated. I'll be right there. The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and fear. Harrison had always hated hospitals. Too many memories of visiting friends who'd pushed their luck one stunt too far. Danny was in ICU, connected to more machines than seemed possible, but his eyes were alert when Harrison entered. Harry. Danny's voice was barely a whisper. Had to tell you. Don't talk, Danny. Just rest. No. Danny struggled to sit up slightly. Michael, he contacted me 3 weeks ago. Said he had to warn you. Said they were coming. Harrison felt the world tilt. Danny, Michael's dead. You know that. Saw him. Met him in Soho. He looked older, scared. Gave me the photo. Said if anything happened to him, I should give it to you. Danny's breathing was labored. He said to tell you, Firebase Delta isn't finished. What does that mean? But Danny's eyes had closed, and the steady beep of the heart monitor indicated he'd slipped back into unconsciousness. Harrison sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside the bed, watching his friend's chest rise and fall with mechanical precision. Outside, London settled into its late-night rhythm, distant sirens, the hum of traffic, the ordinary sounds of a city that had no idea how dramatically Harrison's world had just shifted. If Michael was alive, if he'd really contacted Danny, then everything Harrison thought he knew about the last 20 to 5 years was a lie, and someone was willing to kill to keep it that way. Harrison pulled out his mobile phone with trembling fingers. The ICU was quiet except for the mechanical whispers of life support machines, but his mind raced with fragments of memory he'd buried for decades. Firebase Delta. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud since Michael's funeral. The number came to him automatically, muscle memory from a time when he'd called it almost daily. His mother's house in Chicago. She was 82 now, living in the same craftsman bungalow where they'd grown up. If anyone would know the truth about Firebase Delta, it would be her. The phone rang 4 times before her familiar voice, scratchy with sleep, answered. Mom, it's Harrison. Harry? Sweetheart, it's the middle of the night. Are you all right? Mom, I need to ask you about Michael, about the film he was working on when he died. The silence stretched so long Harrison wondered if the connection had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, guarded, afraid. Why are you asking about that now? Someone mentioned Firebase Delta today, someone who shouldn't know that name. Another pause, then a sharp intake of breath. Harry, you need to stop asking questions about that film. You hear me? Some stones are better left unturned. The fear in her voice chilled him more than Danny's poisoning had. His mother wasn't easily frightened. She'd raised 2 sons who made their living doing dangerous things, had buried one of them, and had never once asked Harrison to choose a safer career. But now she sounded terrified. Mom, what aren't you telling me? What really happened to Michael? He's dead, Harry. You were at the funeral. We both were. That's all that matters. But what if? Her voice turned sharp, almost angry. There is no what if. Michael died in 1975. End of story. And if you're smart, you'll leave it that way. The line went dead. Harrison stared at the phone, his mother's words echoing in his mind. In 40 years, she had never hung up on him, never refused to answer his questions, and never, ever told him to stop pursuing the truth about anything. He looked back at Danny, still unconscious among the machines, and felt the pieces of his carefully ordered world shifting like tectonic plates. Everything he'd built, his career, his relationships, his understanding of his own past, suddenly felt like it was constructed on quicksand. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meet me at the Criterion Theater. Stage door. Come alone. You want answers about Michael? This is your only chance. A friend. Harrison's pulse quickened. The Criterion was 15 minutes away in Piccadilly. He glanced at Danny's still form, then at his watch. Nearly 1 in the morning. Every instinct told him this was a trap, but the need to know the truth burned stronger than his caution. He squeezed Danny's hand gently. I'll be back, he whispered, then slipped out of the ICU. The London streets were nearly empty as Harrison's taxi wound through the West End. Street lamps cast pools of yellow light on wet pavement, and the city felt suspended in that liminal space between night and dawn. As they passed the darkened facades of theaters and shops, Harrison found himself thinking about choices, the moment in everyone's life when they have to decide whether to keep living the comfortable lie or face the dangerous truth. The taxi dropped him at the corner of German Street. The Criterion Theater loomed ahead, its Victorian facade dark and imposing. Harrison had performed there years ago, in a production that had died a quick death before his film career took off. He knew the building's maze-like backstage areas, the narrow corridors and hidden alcoves where secrets could be shared away from prying eyes. The stage door was unlocked. Harrison hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. Emergency lighting cast everything in deep shadows. His footsteps echoed in the empty corridor as he made his way toward the stage, guided by memory and the faint glow of a work light somewhere ahead. A figure was waiting in the wings, silhouetted against the ghost light that stood center stage, the single bare bulb that burned in every theater when the shows went dark. As Harrison approached, the figure stepped forward into the dim light, and Harrison's world tilted completely off its axis. Michael Ford stood before him, 25 years older but unmistakably alive. His hair was gray now, his face lined with the kind of weathered experience that came from decades of looking over your shoulder. But the eyes were the same, intelligent, wary, and filled with a pain that cut straight through Harrison's chest. "Hello, Harry," Michael said quietly. "I guess we need to talk." Harrison couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The brother he'd mourned, the guilt he'd carried, the life he'd built on the foundation of Michael's death, all of it crumbled in an instant. Michael was alive, and someone had been willing to kill to keep them apart. Harrison's legs gave out. He grabbed the nearest piece of stage rigging to keep from collapsing completely, his knuckles white against the black metal. The ghost light cast harsh shadows across Michael's face, making him look like a specter, which, Harrison supposed, he was. "This isn't real," Harrison whispered. "You're dead. I saw your body." Michael's expression softened with something that might have been sympathy. "You saw a body, Harry. Not mine. That's impossible. The dental records matched because they were supposed to match." Michael took a half step closer, then stopped when Harrison flinched back. "We had a lot of help, people who were very good at making inconvenient truths disappear." Harrison's mind reeled. 25 years of grief, of wondering if he could have saved his brother, of building his entire identity around being the Ford brother who survived. All of it based on a lie. Why? The word came out as a croak. "Because they would have killed you too if I'd stayed dead properly." Michael's voice carried the weight of decades. "And because I was young and stupid and thought I could handle it on my own." Handle what? "Michael, what the hell happened on Firebase Delta?" Before Michael could answer, a sound echoed from the theater's depths, footsteps, moving fast. Michael's head snapped toward the noise, and Harrison saw something in his brother's eyes he'd never seen before, pure terror. "Shit. They followed you." Michael grabbed Harrison's arm. "We have to go. Now. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me." "Harry, listen to me." Michael's grip tightened. "The people who poisoned Danny, who tried to kill James, they've been hunting me for 25 years, and now that you know I'm alive, they'll come for you too." The footsteps were getting closer. Multiple sets, moving with military precision through the theater's backstage maze. Harrison felt his chest constrict with the kind of primal fear he'd never experienced on any film set, no matter how dangerous the stunt. "There's a fire exit stage left," he whispered. "But Michael, I need to know." "Later, if we live through this." Michael was already moving, pulling Harrison toward the exit with practiced urgency. They made it halfway across the stage before the lights blazed on, flooding the space with harsh white illumination. Harrison threw his hand up to shield his eyes, temporarily blinded. "Stop right there, Michael." The voice was calm, professional, tinged with an accent Harrison couldn't place. "You've led us quite a chase." As his vision cleared, Harrison saw them. 3 figures in dark clothing, spread across the stage in a tactical formation. They moved like soldiers, but their weapons were the kind of compact pistols that suggested government training. The man in the center, tall, silver-haired, maybe 60, held his gun with the casual competence of someone who'd used it many times before. "Hello, Colonel," Michael said, and Harrison heard resignation in his brother's voice. "Still cleaning up messes for your friends?" The silver-haired man smiled without warmth. "Some messes take longer to clean than others." "You should have stayed dead, Michael. Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble." Harrison found his voice. "Who are you people?" "We're the ones who've been protecting your very successful career, Mr. Ford," the colonel said. "Do you think it was coincidence that you landed the role in Star Wars? That every major film since then has fallen into your lap so easily?" The implication hit Harrison like a physical blow. His career, his success, everything he'd achieved. Had it all been orchestrated? Payment for his silence about a brother he didn't even know was alive? "You're insane," Harrison said. But even as he spoke, fragments of memory surfaced. The lucky breaks that weren't quite random enough. The roles that came his way when other actors seemed more obvious choices. The way certain doors had always opened for him in an industry notorious for crushing dreams. "Harry, don't listen to him," Michael said urgently. "Your talent is real. Your work is real. They just guided things along to keep you happy and quiet." "And it worked beautifully," the colonel added. "Until Danny Reeves started asking inconvenient questions about Firebase Delta. Until you decided to play detective instead of actor. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Danny hadn't been poisoned randomly. He'd been silenced because he'd discovered Michael was alive. Because he'd started investigating the truth about Firebase Delta. What's on that film that's worth killing for?" Harrison demanded. The colonel's expression hardened. Things that certain people prefer to keep buried. Unfortunate decisions made during wartime. The kind of decisions that could still destroy careers, topple governments. Michael's hand found Harrison's shoulder. "Harry, when I tell you to run—" "Nobody's running anywhere," the colonel interrupted. "This ends tonight. Both of you." But as he raised his weapon, the theater's lights cut out again, plunging them into total darkness. In the darkness, chaos erupted. Harrison heard Michael's sharp intake of breath, the scrape of boots on stage flooring, and then his brother's hand clamped down on his wrist with desperate strength. "Move!" Michael hissed, pulling Harrison toward where he remembered the fire exit to be. The colonel's voice cut through the blackness, calm and commanding. Night vision now. "They're heading stage left." Harrison stumbled over a cable, caught himself, kept moving. Behind them, he heard the soft whir of equipment being activated. Of course they'd come prepared. These weren't ordinary killers. They were professionals with resources that dwarfed anything Harrison had encountered in his comfortable Hollywood existence. "Here," Michael whispered, his hands finding the fire door's push bar. But when he pressed it, nothing happened. Locked from the outside. "Emergency ladder," Harrison breathed, remembering the theater's layout. "Fly gallery access?" They felt their way along the wall until Harrison's fingers found the narrow service ladder that led to the fly gallery 20 feet above. Michael went first, moving with the silent efficiency of someone who'd spent years hiding. Harrison followed, his hands slipping on rungs slick with decades of theater dust and moisture. Below them, flashlight beams began sweeping the stage, not random searching, systematic, professional, the kind of search pattern that left no hiding place unchecked. They reached the fly gallery just as the lights below began their methodical sweep of the area they'd vacated. Harrison's chest burned from the climb, but Michael was already moving along the narrow catwalk that ran the width of the theater. Every step seemed impossibly loud in the silence. "There." Michael pointed to a maintenance access that led to the theater's ancient ventilation system. "Can you fit through?" Harrison looked at the narrow opening and thought about every stunt coordinator who'd ever called him too old, too careful. "I guess we'll find out." The ventilation shaft was a claustrophobic nightmare of dust and sharp metal edges. Harrison's jacket caught on a rivet, and he had to stop to work it free while Michael waited in the suffocating darkness ahead of him. Through the thin metal walls, he could hear the systematic search continuing below, doors opening, equipment being moved, the quiet murmur of professional voices coordinating their hunt. "Michael," Harrison whispered, as they crawled through the mechanical intestines of the old building. "What you said about my career, how long have they been watching me?" "Since the funeral." Michael's voice was barely audible. "They needed to make sure you never asked the right questions. Making you successful was easier than making you disappear. The words hit Harrison like physical blows. 25 years of believing in his own talent, his own choices, his own life. And it had all been an elaborate lie designed to keep him compliant. How many roles had he earned, and how many had been gifts from invisible puppet masters? But why keep you alive at all? Why not just— "Because I had insurance," Michael said. "Evidence, hidden where they couldn't find it. The original Firebase Delta footage, witness statements, documentation of what really happened there." His voice carried a bitterness that seemed to have aged in darkness. "I thought it would keep me safe. Instead, it just made them patient." They reached a junction where the ventilation shaft connected to a larger air return. Through the metal grating, Harrison could see they were above the theater's lobby. Michael was working at the great screws with a small tool pulled from his pocket, a multi-tool worn smooth by years of use. "Harry, there's something else you need to know," Michael said as he worked. "About Firebase Delta. About why they've spent 25 years hunting me." The grate came free, and Michael lowered it carefully to the floor below. But as he prepared to drop down, Harrison grabbed his arm. "Tell me now. Before we go any further, I need to know what I'm running from." Michael turned in the confined space, and in the dim light filtering up from the lobby, Harrison saw his brother's face fully for the first time since their impossible reunion. The years had carved deep lines around his eyes, but it was more than age. It was the accumulated weight of secrets that had grown too heavy to carry alone. Firebase Delta wasn't just a war movie, Harry. It was a documentary. We accidentally filmed a massacre. American forces executing Vietnamese prisoners. Civilians, including children. Michael's voice dropped to barely a whisper. The footage we shot could have brought down the entire chain of command, maybe changed how the war ended. Harrison felt the air leave his lungs. Jesus Christ, Michael. The military confiscated everything, or thought they did, but I kept one reel, one that showed everything. Michael's eyes were haunted by more than just the memory. 3 members of our crew died in accidents after the confiscation. That's when I knew they'd come for me too. Below them, footsteps echoed in the lobby. The hunt had expanded beyond the stage, and now they know you know, Michael continued. Which means they can't let either of us live. Harrison stared at his brother in the dim light, feeling everything he thought he knew about his own life crumbling like ancient parchment. 25 years, Michael. 25 years I blamed myself for your death. Every stunt I took, every risk I refused to let other people make. It was all because I thought I'd failed to protect you. Harry. No. Listen to me. Harrison's voice cracked with decades of suppressed grief. I built my whole goddamn life around the idea that I was the brother who lived, who had to make something worthwhile out of surviving when you didn't. Every choice I made, every role I took, every time I looked in the mirror, it was all shaped by losing you. Michael's face contorted with pain. I know, God, Harry, I know what it cost you. But if I'd told you the truth— The truth? Harrison grabbed Michael's jacket, pulling him close in the confined space. The truth is that you let me live a lie. You let me carry guilt that was destroying me while you played dead and puppet masters handed me my career like a consolation prize. Below them, the footsteps were getting closer. The colonel's voice drifted up through the building's old bones. Check the mechanical spaces. They're still in the building. But Harrison couldn't stop. The words were pouring out of him like poison from a lanced wound. You want to know what really happened the day you died? I was supposed to be on that set. I was supposed to be there with you, but I took a commercial audition instead. A fucking 30-second spot for breakfast cereal because I thought it might get me noticed. Michael went very still. Harry, no, that's not— I chose my career over being there for you. And then I spent 25 years trying to make up for it, taking every dangerous job, pushing myself harder and harder, thinking if I could just be brave enough, maybe I could balance the scales. Harrison's voice dropped to a whisper. But you were never dead, were you? You were out there somewhere, and I was just playing hero for an audience that was laughing at me. They weren't laughing, Michael said urgently. Your success, your talent, that's real, Harry. They just made sure the right doors opened. How would you know? You've been dead to me for 25 years. The words hung in the air between them like a blade. Michael's expression crumpled, and for a moment he looked exactly like the younger brother Harrison remembered, the one who'd always looked up to him, who'd followed him into stunt work because Harrison had made it look glamorous. "You think this was easy for me?" Michael's voice was raw. "You think I wanted to watch from the shadows while you grieved? I saw every interview where you mentioned me, every time you dedicated a film to my memory. I watched you at the cemetery on the anniversary of my death. I was there, Harry, hiding behind headstones like some kind of ghost, watching my brother mourn someone who was standing 50 feet away." Harrison felt something break inside his chest. "Then why? Why didn't you trust me with the truth?" "Because I was trying to protect you." Michael's composure finally shattered. "Because the people hunting me don't leave loose ends. Because I thought if I could just stay hidden long enough, find the right leverage, I could end this without dragging you into it. But you failed, didn't you?" Harrison realized the horrible truth even as he spoke it. "That's why Danny got poisoned. That's why this is happening now. Your grand plan to protect me fell apart, and now we're both targets." Michael's silence was answer enough. The footsteps below had reached the lobby directly beneath them. Harrison heard the colonel's voice, closer now. "Sir, we found access to the ventilation system. They're in the walls." But Harrison was looking at his brother, really looking at him for the first time since their impossible reunion. The gray hair, the lines around his eyes, the way he held himself like a man who'd been running for so long he'd forgotten how to stand still. "You're not protecting me anymore," Harrison said quietly. "You're the reason I'm in danger. Your secret, your evidence, your war. It's all finally caught up to both of us." Michael's face went white. "Harry, I never meant—" "But you did mean it." The realization was crystal clear now. "You chose yourself over me. You chose your survival over trusting me with the truth. And you let me build a life on a foundation of lies while you played the martyr in the shadows." From below came the sound of metal being moved, equipment being positioned. They were out of time. "You were right about one thing," Harrison added, reaching for the drop down to the lobby floor. "They can't let either of us live now. But that's not because I learned your secret, Michael. It's because your secret finally learned me." He dropped through the opening before Michael could respond, landing in a crouch on the lobby's worn carpet. Above him, he heard his brother curse softly, a sound like grief made audible. The hunt was closing in, but the real damage had already been done. The lobby's worn carpet muffled Harrison's landing, but not enough. He froze in his crouch, listening to the building's old bones creak around him as footsteps approached from multiple directions. The colonel's team had spread through the theater like water finding cracks, and Harrison was caught in the open space between the main entrance and the corridor leading back to the stage. Above him, Michael dropped through the opening, with the silent grace of someone who'd spent 25 years staying invisible. He landed beside Harrison, and for a moment they crouched together in the dim emergency lighting like children hiding from monsters, except the monsters were real, and they were closing in. "Service corridor," Michael whispered, pointing toward a maintenance door Harrison hadn't noticed. "Leads to the alley behind the building." But Harrison didn't move. Something had crystallized in his mind during their confrontation in the ventilation shaft, a clarity that felt both liberating and terrifying. "No," he said quietly. "I'm done running from your war." Michael's eyes widened. "Harry, what are you—" 25 years, Michael. 25 years of living a lie, and I'm only finding out now because your careful plans fell apart." Harrison stood slowly, his joints protesting after the crawl through the vents. "You want to know what the real tragedy is? It's not that they've been manipulating my career. It's that I was good enough to earn it on my own. And I'll never know which successes were mine and which were bought. We can figure that out later," Michael hissed, grabbing for Harrison's arm. "Right now we need to—" Harrison pulled away. "No. Right now I need to understand why you think your evidence is worth both our lives." He turned to face the direction where the colonel's voice had been strongest. "And why you've spent decades believing you're the only one who could handle this." Michael went very still. "Harry, don't do this. Please." "Do what? Make my own choice for once instead of following a script I didn't know existed?" Harrison felt something he hadn't experienced since he'd started taking safe roles, playing it careful, the reckless clarity of a man with nothing left to lose. You said you had insurance, evidence hidden where they couldn't find it. So where is it? That's not important right now. It's the only thing that's important. Harrison's voice carried further than he'd intended, and they both heard footsteps change direction in response. Don't you see, Michael? They're not hunting you because you're a threat. They're hunting you because you're a symbol of their failure to clean up completely. But that only matters if your evidence actually exists. Michael's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, fear, and finally something that looked like respect. You always were smarter than me, he said quietly. Then prove it. Where's the Firebase Delta footage? Michael looked toward the approaching footsteps, then back at his brother. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a decision that had been 25 years in the making. Safe deposit box. First National Bank on Sepulveda. Box 1847. Registered under the name David Chen. David Chen? Crew member who died in the first accident. I thought using his name would honor him somehow. Michael's laugh was bitter. Turned out it just made me feel worse. The footsteps were close now, maybe 30 seconds away. Harrison could hear the soft whisper of tactical communications, professionals coordinating their final approach. The key? Harrison asked. Michael reached into his jacket and pulled out a small brass key, worn smooth by years of handling. I've carried this every day since 1978. Sometimes I'd take it out just to remind myself why I couldn't come home. Harrison took the key, and as their fingers touched, he saw something in his brother's eyes he'd never seen before: relief. Not the relief of finally sharing a burden, but the deeper relief of finally letting someone else carry it. Harry, Michael said urgently, there's something else, about why they kept you successful instead of just eliminating you. It wasn't just to keep you quiet. They needed you visible, established, credible, because they were afraid that someday you might be the one to tell this story. The realization hit Harrison like a physical blow. They were planning to use me. If my evidence ever surfaced, if the story ever came out, who better to give it credibility than Harrison Ford? American hero, beloved actor, grieving brother seeking justice. Michael's voice was hollow. They turned your career into their insurance policy. Harrison closed his eyes, feeling the last pieces of his carefully constructed life crumble away. Everything, his success, his choices, his very identity, had been shaped by forces he'd never known existed. But underneath the devastation, something else was growing, a cold, purposeful anger unlike anything he'd ever felt. Then let's give them exactly what they're afraid of, he said, opening his eyes to meet his brother's gaze. But first, we're going to survive this. The footsteps had reached the lobby's edge. Time for hiding was over. The colonel stepped into the lobby's dim light like a shadow-given substance, his tactical team spreading behind him with practiced precision. Harrison counted 4 figures, fewer than he'd expected, but each moved with the fluid economy of professionals who'd done this before. Gentlemen, the colonel said, his voice carrying the same measured tone Harrison remembered from the hospital. This has gone far enough. Harrison stepped forward, away from his brother, and felt something shift inside him. The same transformation he'd experienced as Indiana Jones, but deeper, more personal. This wasn't acting. This was choosing who he wanted to be in the moment that would define the rest of his life. Has it? Harrison asked. Because from where I stand, it's just getting started. The colonel's eyes flicked to Michael, then back to Harrison. Mr. Ford, you're out of your depth. This is a matter of national security that goes back decades. Lives have been lost protecting secrets that could destabilize. Stop! Harrison's voice cut through the practiced speech. Just stop with the patriotic bullshit. I know what Firebase Delta was. I know what you're really protecting. For the first time, the colonel's composure cracked slightly. Then you understand why this can't go public. I understand why you think it can't. Harrison felt the weight of the key in his pocket. But more than that, he felt the weight of 25 years of living someone else's version of his life. But here's what you never considered. I'm not the same man you've been managing all these years. Behind the colonel, one of the tactical team members shifted slightly, and Harrison caught the movement. These weren't government agents, they were contractors, mercenaries, the kind of people who cleaned up messes that official channels couldn't touch. "Michael," Harrison said without turning around, "tell them about the insurance policy you never mentioned to me." Michael's voice was uncertain. "Harry, what are you—" "Tell them about the dead man's switch, the one that triggers if you don't check in every 72 hours. Harrison was gambling everything on his understanding of his brother. The Michael he'd known had always been thorough, always planned for contingencies. The silence stretched for 5 seconds that felt like hours. Then Michael spoke, his voice gaining strength as he understood what Harrison was doing. "Automatic delivery to 7 major news outlets," Michael said. "Complete documentation, the original Firebase Delta footage, witness statements, chain of custody records, all authenticated and verified." The colonel's face went granite hard. "You're lying." "Am I?" Harrison stepped closer, close enough to see the calculation in the older man's eyes. "You've spent 25 years believing my brother was some traumatized kid running scared with stolen film. But he's had a quarter-century to prepare for this moment. Did you really think he'd make it this easy?" "Even if that were true," the colonel said carefully, "the evidence would lack credibility. One man's word against the United States military." "Not just one man's word," Harrison interrupted. "Harrison Ford's word, the credible, established, beloved American icon whose career you so carefully cultivated. The grieving brother whose testimony would give the story exactly the kind of emotional weight that makes scandals stick." The colonel's tactical mistake was written across his face, the dawning realization that their long-term strategy had created the very weapon that could destroy them. "You made me into your insurance policy," Harrison continued, "but insurance works both ways. You can't kill me without validating everything Michael says, and you can't let me live knowing what I know now." Michael stepped up beside him, and for the first time in 25 years, Harrison felt his brother's presence as support rather than burden. "There's a third option," the colonel said quietly. "Which is, we make a deal. Your brother disappears, permanently this time. You return to your life, your career continues, and everyone forgets this conversation ever happened." Harrison felt Michael tense beside him, but he didn't hesitate. "And Firebase Delta remains classified. Some secrets are worth more than individual lives." The offer hung in the air like poison gas. Harrison could see his path back to safety, back to the comfortable lie of his managed existence. All he had to do was sacrifice his brother again, really this time. Instead, Harrison pulled out his phone. "What are you doing?" the colonel snapped. "Calling in the favor you never saw coming," Harrison said, scrolling through his contacts. "You see, there's one thing your surveillance missed. All those Hollywood connections you helped me build, some of them are real friendships. The kind where people answer their phones at 3 in the morning. He found the number he wanted, a journalist who'd covered his films, become a friend, someone who'd always promised she'd be there if he ever had a real story to tell." 40 years of credibility, Harrison said, his thumb hovering over the call button. "Everything I am, everything you made me into, I'm betting it all on the truth." The colonel raised his hand, and his team tensed. Harrison pressed call. The phone rang once before Sarah Martinez answered, her voice sharp with the alertness of a journalist who'd built her career on calls that came at impossible hours. "Harrison? Jesus, it's 3:30 in the morning. Are you—" "Sarah, I need you to listen very carefully," Harrison said, his eyes locked on the colonel's face. "I'm about to give you the story of your career, but you need to start recording now." He could hear the rustle of movement, the click of equipment being activated. Sarah had covered wars, broken political scandals, earned her credibility in the same trenches where truth was hammered out of lies. If anyone would understand what he was about to give her, it would be her. "Recording," she said simply. "My name is Harrison Ford, and 25 years ago, my brother Michael was murdered by the United States military to cover up war crimes committed at Firebase Delta in Vietnam 1975. The colonel's hand dropped, and his team relaxed slightly. The moment for violence had passed. Any shots fired now would only validate every word Harrison spoke into the phone. Harrison continued, his voice steady and clear. "Michael survived that murder attempt, and has spent the last quarter-century gathering evidence of systematic war crimes, including the execution of Vietnamese civilians and the falsification of military records. That evidence is currently held in Safe Deposit Box 1847 at First National Bank on Sepulveda Boulevard, registered under the name David Chen. He could hear Sarah's sharp intake of breath, could picture her mind already racing ahead to verification procedures, source protection, the careful choreography of breaking a story this large. The man responsible for those crimes and the subsequent cover-up is standing in front of me right now with a tactical team, debating whether it's worth killing a Hollywood actor to keep this secret buried. The colonel spoke for the first time since Harrison had made the call. "Mr. Ford, you're making a mistake that will have consequences beyond anything you can imagine." "Did you get that, Sarah?" Harrison asked. "That was a direct threat from the man who's been manipulating my career for 25 years to keep me compliant." "I got it." Sarah's voice was tight with the controlled excitement of a hunter who just caught scent of prey. "Harrison, where are you? I can have a camera crew." "No crews. Not yet. First you verify the evidence in that safe deposit box. Box 1847, First National on Sepulveda, named David Chen. My brother will provide you with the key and full authentication." Michael stepped forward and spoke clearly into the phone. "My name is Michael Ford. I was declared dead in 1978 after witnessing the execution of 17 Vietnamese civilians by U.S. forces under the command of Colonel James Morrison, currently assigned to military intelligence operations in Los Angeles." Harrison watched the colonel's face go pale at hearing his name spoken aloud. After decades of operating in shadows, of being the invisible hand that shaped events, James Morrison was being dragged into the light. "The original footage still exists," Michael continued, "along with witness statements from 3 other soldiers who survived the incident. Everything you need to verify this story is in that deposit box." Harrison ended the call and slipped the key from his pocket, holding it out to Michael. As his brother took it, their fingers touched again, and Harrison felt something pass between them. Not just the weight of evidence, but the weight of 25 years of separation finally lifting. "It's over," Harrison said to the colonel. "Whatever happens to us now, the story's already out there." Morrison studied them for a long moment, and Harrison could see the man calculating odds, measuring consequences. Finally, the colonel stepped back and made a subtle gesture to his team. They melted away into the shadows as silently as they'd appeared. "This isn't over, Mr. Ford," Morrison said quietly. "There are consequences to exposing state secrets that you haven't considered." "Probably," Harrison agreed. "But they'll be my consequences, chosen freely. I haven't had many of those lately." After Morrison disappeared into the night, the brothers stood alone in the abandoned theater's lobby. The emergency lighting cast long shadows between them, but for the first time in 25 years, Harrison felt like he could see clearly. "What happens now?" Michael asked. Harrison thought about his career, about the films he might never make, about the comfortable life he was walking away from. Then he thought about Danny Reeves, lying in a hospital bed because he'd gotten caught in the crossfire of someone else's war. "Now we go home," Harrison said. "We check on Danny. We make sure Sarah has everything she needs to tell this story right." He looked at his brother, really looked at him, seeing not the ghost he'd been mourning, but the man he'd become. "And then we figure out how to be brothers again." As they walked toward the theater's exit, Harrison felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. The weight of truth, heavy but clean, like good stone in his hands.